A man in a gray lab coat sits in the corner of the room and says one sentence. Please continue. That is all he has. No threat, no weapon, no punishment waiting for you if you refuse. He cannot fire you. He cannot fine you. He cannot arrest you. He is not even a scientist. He is a high school biology teacher, being paid to look serious. And yet, in the summer of 1961, 2 out of every 3 ordinary men in that room kept pressing a switch they believed was sending 450 volts into a screaming stranger. That is the version of this story you already know. It has been printed in every psychology textbook for 60 years. What almost nobody tells you is what was actually happening in that room, minute by minute, on tape. The man in the lab coat was not calm. He was not politely repeating 4 scripted lines. He was arguing, pushing, improvising, and in some sessions, almost begging people to keep going. Which means the famous lesson of this experiment might be the exact opposite of what it actually proved. To understand why Stanley Milgram built this machine, you have to understand what he was watching on television. In April of 1961, Adolf Eichmann went on trial in Jerusalem. He was one of the men who organized the transport logistics of the Holocaust. Trains, schedules, quotas, the paperwork of mass murder. And Eichmann did not stand in that glass booth screaming about ideology. He was polite. He was boring. He kept repeating that he had simply followed orders, that he was a small man inside a very large machine, and that the decisions had been made somewhere above him. The world was horrified. But a lot of people were also quietly disturbed for a completely different reason. Because he did not look like a monster. He looked like an accountant. Milgram was 27 years old, Jewish, the son of immigrants, and freshly hired at Yale. He wanted to know whether Eichmann's excuse was a convenient lie, or a description of something that lives inside almost everybody. So he did something that would be illegal today. He built a machine to find out how far a normal American would go. And he lied to every single person who walked through his door. Here's what it looked like from the inside. You answer a small advertisement in the New Haven newspaper. $4.50 for 1 hour of your time. A study on memory and learning at Yale University. You are a teacher, an engineer, a postal clerk, an ordinary man in 1961. You arrive at the laboratory and you meet another volunteer, a pleasant, slightly overweight accountant in his late 40s. Somewhere in the small talk, he mentions that he has a mild heart condition. He is not a volunteer. He works for Milgram, and every word he says to you has been rehearsed. The two of you draw folded slips of paper from a hat to decide who plays which role. The draw is rigged. Both slips say teacher. You are always going to be the teacher, and he was always going to be the learner, and you will never know that the choice was made before you arrive. Then you watch them take him into the next room. You watch them strap his arms to a wooden chair. You watch them attach an electrode to his skin and smear paste on it to prevent blisters and burns, as the man in the lab coat calmly explains. And then they close the door, and they sit you down in front of the machine. The machine is beautiful, in a horrible way. A long gray panel of 30 switches, running from 15 volts on the far left, all the way to 450 volts on the far right. Beneath them, the labels climb like a warning nobody is ever supposed to reach. Slight shock. Moderate. Strong. Very strong. Intense. Extreme intensity. Danger. Severe shock. And then the final 2 switches, at the very end, carry no warning at all. Just 3 letters and nothing else. Whatever they mean, the machine refuses to say. Your job is simple. You read word pairs into an intercom. When the man in the other room answers wrong, you press the next switch to the right. Every mistake moves you 1 step further along the board. At 75 volts, you hear a grunt. At 120, he shouts that the shocks are becoming painful. At 150, he demands to be let out. He says his heart is bothering him. He tells you he refuses to continue. At 300 volts, he screams that he will not answer any more questions. After 330, there is nothing at all. and a silent man cannot answer a question. So silence is recorded as a wrong answer, and the procedure tells you to shock him again. When you hesitate, and almost everybody hesitates, the man in the lab coat gives you a line. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. You must go on. 4 sentences. That is officially the entire arsenal of the most famous authority figure in the history of psychology. No gun. No badge. No consequence of any kind. Before running it, Milgram asked a room full of psychiatrists to predict what would happen. They said almost everyone would stop early, and that perhaps one person in 1,000, some rare and damaged sadist, might go all the way to the end of the board. 65% went to the end of the board. 2 out of 3 ordinary men pressed that final switch, the one marked only with 3 letters, on a stranger who had told them he had a heart condition and who had then gone completely silent. And they were not enjoying it. The records describe men sweating, stuttering, digging their fingernails into their own palms. 3 of them had convulsive, seizure-like fits of nervous laughter. 1 had to be stopped because he could no longer breathe properly. They were suffering, and they kept going anyway. That is where the textbook version ends. 1 clean, terrifying number. 65%. But in 2001, Milgram's private archive was opened at Yale. Boxes of paper, hundreds of hours of audio recorded inside the sessions themselves. Notes he never published in his lifetime. And when the Australian psychologist Gina Perry began listening to those tapes, the clean story started to come apart. The first problem is the 4 sentences. On the recordings, the experimenter does not calmly repeat 4 polite prompts. He improvises. He argues. He interrupts. In some sessions, he pressures a single participant more than 25 separate times. He tells people, completely off script, that the shocks are not dangerous. He overrules them. He wears them down. Milgram's own rule was that if a participant refused 4 times, the session had to end. On the tapes, that rule is broken again and again and again. The second problem is the number itself. 65% is not the result of the experiment. It is the result of one particular version of it. Because Milgram did not run this study once. He ran at least 24 different variations, and he decided which one the world would remember. Change one small detail, and the entire finding moves. Put the learner in the same room, so the teacher can see his face, and obedience falls to around 40%. Make the teacher physically press the learner's hand down onto the metal plate, and it falls further still. Take the man in the lab coat out of the room, and give the orders over a telephone, and obedience collapses to roughly 20%. Participants start lying to him. They pretend to press switches. They quietly refuse while sounding perfectly cooperative. And in one variation, 2 other teachers in the room, both actors, stand up and walk out in protest. When that happens, almost everybody follows them. Around 90% disobey. That is a finding just as powerful as the famous one. And you have probably never heard it. Then, there is the ugliest question of all. Did they even believe it? In Milgram's own follow-up questionnaires, only about half of the participants said they had fully believed the learner was receiving real, painful shocks. Some told him afterwards that something about the setup had felt staged, that a serious university would never actually electrocute a man in a basement. And later, analysis of his own records suggests something worse. The participants who doubted were among the most likely to go all the way to the end. So if it was not blind obedience, then what was it? Milgram's own explanation was something he called the agentic state. The idea that a person stops experiencing themselves as the author of their own actions and begins experiencing themselves as an instrument, a tool in someone else's hand. Not a man pressing a switch, but a man carrying out a procedure. It is an elegant theory, and the tapes do not really support it, because the people who kept going were not blank. They were not empty or hypnotized. They were engaged. On the recordings you can hear participants asking about the science, checking whether the data will still be usable, worrying out loud about ruining the study. Two researchers, Alexander Haslam and Stephen Reicher, gave this a different name: engaged followership. The participants were not mindless instruments. They were volunteers who had decided that the man in the lab coat represented something worth serving. Science, progress, knowledge, something larger than the noise coming through the wall. And that is a far darker idea than obedience. An instrument carries no guilt. A believer does. Now look at those 4 prompts again. 3 of them are commands. But here's the strangest detail in the entire dataset. The 4th one, the only one that is a genuine order: you have no other choice, you must go on, almost never worked. When the experimenter finally used it, participants stopped. Order a man, and he refuses. Invite him into the project, and he keeps pressing. So we are left with an experiment that does not mean what we were taught it meant. The comfortable version is that human beings are sheep. That authority quietly switches off our conscience, and we become machinery. And that is comfortable, precisely because machinery is not guilty. If it could happen to anyone, then it is nobody's fault. The tapes suggest something much worse. The man in the lab coat did not switch anyone off. He gave them a reason. He told them the work mattered, that the data was important, that they were part of something bigger than the screaming next door. And they agreed with him. Nobody in that basement was forced. They were recruited. Not by threat, but by meaning. 65 years later, the shock machine sits behind glass in a museum in Ohio. Basement laboratory at Yale is gone. Milgram is dead. The tapes are in boxes. But the sentence is still here. It is the single most effective sentence anyone has ever written for making a decent person do an indecent thing, and it is not an order at all. The experiment requires that you continue. So the real question was never whether you would obey a man in a lab coat. Nobody obeys a lab coat. The question is what they would have to tell you it was for.